Okay, so we've talked about pregnancy. It was tricky for me. I found it really hard. Sickness, the fear of loss. And then we come to birth. Transformational, but the transformation didn't really land for me probably for about 2 years. So I haven't ever really told my birth story with William because I've been under the impression for quite a long time that it's dangerous to share your story and misinform women that are pregnant or make them feel scared. So I have never ever shared my full birth story. I have shared elements of it within the really small circles that I hold. So for my birth biomechanics workshop, when I hold that in person, I share elements of my story. And when I do pregnancy retreat days to really help pregnant mothers feel safe and connected to their bodies, again, I'll share elements when people ask about different parts of birth, and I'll share both bits of my birth story. But my whole birth story, I have never written it or spoken about it publicly. What I can remember after my birth is that I desperately wanted to share my birth story. I desperately wanted to be witnessed. I desperately wanted to be seen in all that I'd experienced. And also, I think witnessed is the right word. I didn't want anybody to give me any feedback or comment on anything I was sharing, but I really did want to be witnessed in the real trauma that I felt. So although on paper, if you looked at what happened in my first birth, you would say that it was almost textbook. To me, it didn't feel like that. To me, the experience that I had when I was birthing my baby felt as though I was left feeling as though I hadn't done a good enough job, that I didn't do it right, and that actually I wasn't worthy of being a mother because of that. So if you listen to my story about pregnancy, you'll know that I was fearing a miscarriage the whole time. And I really do think that this had quite a big impact on my birth experience with William, because I think my subconscious brain was really fearful that I was going to birth a baby that wasn't going to breathe. And so when it came to the pushing part, which was a really long part of my labour, I feel as though there was something that was internally holding that process back because I didn't want the next bit to come. There was also some other things that made that process harder, and I'll talk to you about those in a minute. So we booked in for an induction because I was really lucky actually that William was due on the 28th of December. So I kind of, because of how my midwife appointments fell, I kind of got an extra bit of time. So I think it was probably about, it was that middle bit in between Christmas and New Year that we booked in for an induction. But I think the induction was due to happen on maybe the 5th of January. My mum had stayed with us for the whole of Christmas, and whilst I love my mum to pieces, she is amazing and has helped me so much, especially once I've had both of my babies. I do wonder if on reflection maybe her being here was a bit of was something that was making my nervous system not relax enough and not produce enough oxytocin, because I wanted it to be an experience that was just for me and for Ben at the time. So my mum was here for a lot of Christmas, and then on the day that she said she was going to go home the next day, that night I actually went into labour, so she was still here at the time. What had I done? So in the build up to that day, I'd consciously thought, right, I know my mum's going home tomorrow. I want to have a little bit of time with her because it's going to be the last time I get to spend some time with her without my baby. So we went for a really lovely walk and we had a really delicious lunch. And then because I'd spent all day with her, I then decided that I was going to go out with my husband for a little bit of just one-on-one time in the evening. So I think we just we went to Costa and we had a very big hot chocolate, because I've got a picture of that in my photo roll. I've got my iPad here and I'm just looking back at some of the photos to cue me on some of the information that I want to share with you guys. So I had a very big hot chocolate. I think we also then went to the pub. Obviously I didn't have anything to drink alcohol wise, but my husband had a beer, and we just chatted. Because my mum had been up with us for the whole of Christmas, we hadn't had any one-on-one time for actually quite a long time, and so that felt really special. We got home and I got really, really angry about the fact that nobody had made my bed for me. So we'd washed the sheets. I knew like labour was probably going to happen soon, and I was desperate to come home to clean sheets once I'd had my baby. So yeah, I got really cross at the fact that no one offered to help me put the clean bed sheets on the bed. So I went off to bed in a huff. I put my meditation in because at that point I'd been listening to a meditation to help me go to sleep, probably from about 25 weeks of pregnancy, and it worked. It was this thing that I plugged in. It was just a hypnobirthing track. It was all positive birth affirmations to really gentle music. And I used to listen to it in bath, and I associated listening to that sound with rest and relaxation. So I plugged that in, but I couldn't go to sleep. And then at about 9 o'clock I started to get, I just felt generally unwell, but it turned out that was the start of labour. And we laboured at home from 9:30 until about 5 o'clock in the morning, or 9 till 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd had a bath, and it got to the point where what was happening, well, the tightening that I felt in my body was a bit too much. I felt like I couldn't deal with it on my own. So we rang the hospital and we drove down, and then we were admitted because I had the vaginal check, and I was deemed far enough along to stay, so that 4 to 5 centimetres dilated. And because it was quite quiet, I was offered a suite that had a bath in, basically. I hadn't specifically said that I wanted to have a water birth, but one was available, so the person said, like, we've got one, so you may as well just go and give it a try. So that was the space that we went into. And the first thing that I remember feeling really vulnerable about was the fact that because I hadn't prepared for a water birth, but actually the idea of getting into the bath sounded great, that actually in order to get into the bath, I didn't have any clothes to wear, so I needed to be naked. So I stripped down and I got in the bath, and whilst the water felt really nice initially, it was on the cool side, which later proved to be an issue. I just felt really vulnerable and exposed. I got this person that I'd never met before, this midwife, which also they changed over around about that time as well, so I met 2 different people, and I also didn't have a bra on, and at the time I was really self-conscious of my boobs. They were always really small, and yeah, I didn't love them. They weren't anything that I felt really proud of, or that I was actually comfortable really to share with my husband. I didn't really enjoy like doing that kind of exploring my boobs together. I just felt really detached from them. So yeah, I knew I was feeling vulnerable and open and exposed. And we were in the water for quite a long time, and labour progressed. I opted to have the vaginal examinations because I, at the time, thought that was quite a useful tool to know my progress. Obviously, I now know, because of the learning that I've done, that actually your cervix dilating doesn't necessarily tell us how far along your labour experience is. But at the time, I found some reassurance in that. So once I got to 10 centimetres dilated, my lovely midwife said that I could start to push on my contractions. And for me, this is where it all started to fall down. The bath wasn't hot enough for me. It was at its set by procedure 37.5 degrees, I think it is, which is your body temperature. And I like really hot baths. So I felt quite cold in the bath. And whilst the water and kind of that movement that came from being in the water was nourishing to me and helped me kind of move into that rest and digest state, because I had lots of baths in pregnancy, the fact that it wasn't warm enough wasn't great. The fact that I felt exposed through the top part of my body again would have been slowing down that production of oxytocin. And then it came to pushing, and my midwife coached me to push, which I'd asked not to have, but because I didn't quite understand this connection between being 10 centimetres dilated and the fact that then from a hospital point of view, that's then when you are told you need to push. I didn't understand how that worked, because my physical body, what I was feeling was that I wasn't ready to push, but I didn't understand that nuance at the time. So I was being told to push every time I had a contraction, to bear down, to try and go like push down like I was trying to have a poo. But I couldn't make my body do it really, or I felt like I couldn't, because my body wasn't ready yet. My uterus hadn't pulled up far enough. I hadn't got that big fundus at the top of my uterus for that muscle to be pushing down. And having now experienced 2 ways of pushing a baby out, I now know why that first experience was so tricky. It was just because my body wasn't ready. So this coach pushing went on for a long time. It was over an hour because my lovely midwife knew that I didn't want any intervention, and she tried really hard to kind of give me that little bit of extension. What was also happening during this time was, because I was quite tired, I'd been up all night, and we were kind of like at the lunchtime phase by now, so 9 o'clock in the evening till 12 o'clock the following lunchtime. I was tired, and I'd started to become quite stationary in the water, and so I wasn't moving my body. I wasn't allowing my pelvis to shift and move for my baby to kind of rotate down and come out the way that it needed to. And I also had that fear that the baby, when it was born, wasn't going to be alive. Although listening to the heartbeat with the Doppler was really reassuring to me throughout that experience. So, you know, when you're thinking about, if you're preparing for birth and you're thinking about having some time, or you're thinking about those checks that the midwives can do, the vaginal examinations, the listening to the baby's heart rate, you don't have to say no, because I think sometimes when you're looking at more of this physiological, holistic, hypnobirthing kind of way, quite a lot of the guidance is that you don't need that information and that you need to tune in. But actually, if you're very much in a state of stress and anxiety and you like to control things, you might find that really helpful, because for me in my first birth, that was helpful to me. In my second birth, it wouldn't have been, which is why I opted not to have it, because I felt much more able to tune in. But if you're somebody that feels like you really don't like connecting in with your body, then maybe that information is helpful. So the heartbeat was really reassuring to me. We got to the point then where we'd been pushing for over an hour and a half, and the senior midwife came in and basically said that actually it was too long now. We needed to do something else. So I was taken out of the bath, and the whole time, as I was being lifted out of the bath, because I needed help to do that and to move, I just felt like I'd failed, because I knew that there was going to be some kind of intervention that came. And I was so tired, and I felt like I'd let myself down, I'd let my husband down, I'd let the midwife down, because she kept saying, you need to push, you're not doing what I'm telling you, you need to push on the contraction, and I just couldn't make my body do it. So I remember getting out of the bath and feeling really let down, and then being put onto the bed and having my legs put up in that position of like legs akimbo, and people, like the lights all of a sudden coming on and people being around. And I can remember looking at my husband, and I remember him saying to me, if you don't try now, they're gonna do stuff to you. Like it's happening now. And I can remember saying, I can't, having a contraction, and then really bearing down, and all of a sudden this need, like it was almost as if my body took over and the pushing just happened regardless of me trying. And this like real burning sensation as William's head kind of moved out through that perineum part of my body. But obviously I was on my back, so it was really quite stingy. But that then meant that the intervention stopped. They put an injection in. I felt that kind of needle go in to put some anaesthetic in, but it didn't work quickly enough for the head coming out. And then, yeah, we waited for the contractions. I was still on my back, which I knew wasn't ideal. But we waited for the contractions to come and the more pushes to come. And then this little thing was kind of plonked on my chest, and he was breathing. He was a boy and he was breathing, and I kind of can remember looking down and his eyes were open, and I can remember to say hello. And yeah, it was really surreal, because it kind of, I hadn't ever allowed myself to think about that part of birth happening, and actually having this live baby on my chest. And he started to do his thing, he started to do his wriggly thing to kind of root up to my breast, and he latched straight away and started to feed, which was just incredible. Like, I hadn't really understood how babies moved to find that breast naturally. I just hadn't ever comprehended that. So for me, that was this most astounding thing, and I was almost taken aback at how incredible nature is, how incredible we are, how incredible physiology is, and actually, seeing and really believing that our bodies know best for the first time. And then I can remember being asked if I wanted the injection. So once you've had your baby, you can have active management of your placenta, or you can have non-active management, basically where you wait for the placenta to do its thing itself. And I'd put in my birth plan that I didn't want the injection and that I wanted a physiological third stage. I was asked if I wanted the injection, and because of what had happened before, I'd really started to doubt my ability of being able to birth, despite the fact that I had actually all by myself just pushed a baby out. And I said yes. The moment that injection went into my leg, I felt this sense of doom land in my system, because I'd gone back on something that I was really clear that I didn't want. And I believe, although there's no evidence to suggest this, we'll never be able to prove it, but I think that moment was the point where my placenta was never going to deliver. In order for your placenta to deliver, you need oxytocin in really high doses, because it's the oxytocin that allows that effective contraction of the womb, of the uterus, and that's what allows the placenta to completely detach and then for it to leave your body. So I was low on oxytocin because I'd gone into that fight or flight. I was holding on to everything. My body had frozen up. And so my placenta was never going to deliver. So skin to skin, William, breastfeeding, lots of lovely things. I then remember feeling like quite a lot of pushing down on my womb space as my midwife tried to kind of feel what was happening to the placenta, and some quite, what felt to me like quite hard pulling. Now it felt like quite hard pulling because my placenta was still in some form attached to the inside of my uterus, and it felt like I really didn't want to do it, but because I was so unaware of what this process was, I didn't feel like I could say no. So it got to over an hour and my placenta hadn't delivered, and so we started to talk about intervention in terms of surgical removal of my placenta, and because of I guess my lack of knowledge of that third stage, really, if I'm being completely honest, in my birth preparation, I'd done all the bit, I got to the pushing out of the baby, and then there was this another chapter of the book about the placenta, and I can remember thinking, what, there's more? Like, I've just birthed the baby, can we not just deal with that first? And so I was really quite blasé about this delivery of the placenta, and I didn't do enough research. And it just goes to show, I think, how being informed can really impact on your experience, because I didn't understand this kind of how the placenta should deliver physiologically, and I didn't understand what the active management did, and so then when it came to this, I didn't know some of the things that I could have done to make it possibly come out, like getting up and having a wee, moving my body again, because obviously your pelvis needs to chop and change and move a little bit to allow that uterus to keep contracting and then the placenta to come down. So I was never offered to go for a wee. I was never offered the opportunity to move. So those things could have made a difference. But anyway, that didn't happen. We went for a surgical removal of my placenta, which meant that I had to have a spinal block. And again, that was another moment for me. Like I'd not had an epidural. I'd managed to get through birth without an epidural, which at the time I was like really celebrating. And then I had to have a spinal block anyway. Actually, that spinal block for the placenta delivery is a full block. So it's not like a partial one with epidural where you can still feel some sensation. It was complete from kind of rib cage down. I had no sensation in my legs. And that freaked me out. So I have always been reasonably body aware, quite connected to my body, danced from being 3 all the way through to university, loved to move my body physically, like running and going to the gym, as I've shared already. So to not be able to feel my legs panicked me. And I went into surgery, and the actual experience of surgery was fine, but I wasn't with William. He was skin to skin with my husband. So I wasn't with him, and that Didn't feel like it was a big issue until I got into the recovery room. But that whole procedure was great. The hospital staff were incredible. They were really reassuring. They spoke to me the whole time. And I actually did feel really safe in that circumstance. It was then when I went through to recovery and my husband wasn't there and my baby weren't there, and I was in recovery for, it felt like a decade. I'd gone into kind of a state of fight or flight, and I was shaking. I was freezing cold, even though I was covered up by sheets. I was panicking, basically. My body had gone into shock and I was panicking, and that shake was what that was about. But I didn't understand that at the time, and I couldn't catch my breath and I couldn't speak. But I stayed in recovery for a while, it felt like, and for a lot of that time I was on my own. Then I went back through into the birthing suite, and my husband was there holding my little boy, and then my little boy got put back onto my chest. And yeah, that was birth. It was done. But I honestly felt like I'd done a really, really bad job. And it took me a really long time to process all of those things, to be able to share that with you in a podcast or a video, however you're watching this now or engaging with this now. Because I didn't want my experience to badly or negatively impact somebody else by sharing my story. And also, I genuinely thought that because I'd heard other people's stories of birth and they had intervention and other things that had happened to their bodies, whether it was through kind of episiotomies and forceps deliveries, or whether it was through an emergency C-section, I genuinely thought that I didn't have a right to feel how I felt about my birth experience and honour or witness the trauma that I was feeling, because my experience hadn't been as bad as somebody else's. And that's a really crucial point that I would like to share here. So you could be listening to this and have had a physiological birth that you didn't feel in control of, and you still might feel like I did, like I didn't do a good enough job. And it's really important that you take the opportunity to share your birth story with somebody that is going to hold you and allow you to feel the grief, the trauma, the despair, whatever it is that you need to feel, so that you can process that experience and move on. Because I didn't share a lot about how I was feeling. And also, when I shared that I was feeling negative with my husband about it, he didn't understand. He was like, but you did it. Nobody helped you. You did it. Like, you should be really proud of yourself. You were amazing. And from his perspective, that probably was the case. It didn't feel stressful or traumatic to him. But to me, it really did. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. And yeah, I didn't really feel like I was witnessed in that until later on, when I found people to kind of do that deeper work. So, some takeaway points: if you're pregnant, do the work on the third part of your birth. Yeah, really, really important. And if you kind of need any help with that, reach out to me. I've got some resources that I can share with you around that. But it's so important to think about that placenta, especially if you're thinking that you want to have like a physiological birth. It's important that you read into that a little bit more. And also how important it is that if what you've written in your birth plan then isn't what happens, how important it is to kind of go back and really explore that with midwives, or with people that you know and you love, or with somebody that has experienced it and that kind of offers this as something that they want to hold women through as part of the work that they do. So yeah, that was birth, not how I wanted it to be, and I believe my experience really impacted that fourth trimester, because I spent the whole time trying to run away from what had happened, trying to bury it down. One of the things that I had to do after my placenta was delivered, because I'd had a spinal block and gone into surgery, I was then given I had to inject into my tummy for 10 days after I'd had my little one. And that in itself was massive for me. The fact that I had to inject my own tummy every day. By the end of the 10 days, I was really good at it, but I felt sick. Like, doing it felt awful. I didn't want to put this stuff into my body. I was breastfeeding, so I didn't know what kind of chemicals were being released off through my milk and into my baby. And again, it was just that reminder for 10 days after I'd given birth that I hadn't done a good enough job, and as a result I was having to give myself this injection. The reason for the injection was to avoid blood clotting, but I didn't understand that at the time, and it was only once I did my birth reflections just before I was due to have my little girl, so like 3.5 years on, that I understood that. And when I asked in the birth reflections why, they couldn't actually tell me, because according to all of my notes based on the policy at that point when I had my reflections, I wouldn't have been given those injections. So that was something that I had to take on board as well. Like, policy changes and shifts based on evidence generally, but the evidence that we have around pregnancy and birth and fourth trimester and postnatal recovery is pants. It's not good enough. And so we have to turn to each other. We have to turn to each other to share each other's stories. We have to, be open, I think, to other people's experiences and all of the knowledge that is out there, but not based on a paper that's written and then studied on, usually by men. But yeah, go back to how it really does feel from a physiological point of view to birth a baby. I'll share my second birth experience with you as well. But yeah, I hope you have found elements of this that are useful. If you're pregnant, I've got a birth biomechanics course, which is available on my website. I also have an online pregnancy yoga program, which includes the birth biomechanics course. So they might be some things that you want to look into. I also work with women one-to-one to talk about physiological birth, but we don't just talk about the process, the physical process, because I really deeply believe that where you are mentally massively impacts on how you birth. If you go for a physiological birth, it really, really matters where you're at in your brain. If you're running away from things, it's going to impact your birth experience. I was running away from the fact that I might lose my baby. One of the first things I did in my second pregnancy was spend a lot of time writing about what would happen and how I would feel if I lost the baby, because it was a ghost in my closet that I needed to address so that I could fully connect to the baby that I was growing in my second pregnancy, because I understood how much it had impacted my first pregnancy. So yeah, some things to leave you with there. I hope it's resonated with some of you. Please tell me if it has. There might be some other things that you've taken from this that I can share more deeply with you in video or in writing. So yeah, please do let me know how that's landed for you, and if there's anything else that you feel you need.